Hey guys, so today in this video I'm going to be talking about suffering related to balance and also to a couple of the other aspects of the balance versus change framework. Um, and I just uh, realized like this topic is pretty important because I was reading a book about like communication from a Buddhist perspective, and they were talking about like how the suffering is like generational, and that reminded me of the generational cycle slash problem. And it also reminded me of the cycle of bad energy. And it also talks about how a lot of the time people ignore the suffering, like ignore their pain, and that causes them to not deal with it. So it just continues, right? The cycle just continues. Whereas if you confront it, then you can deal with it and you can get rid of it sooner. Even if, like, maybe for a time you're literally confronting it instead of ignoring it. And so maybe maybe you feel slightly more in pain, but you deal with it much faster. So, you get rid of it. So it has, yeah, so it's not really like you're gonna, yeah, it works out. So anyway, the point is that what I noticed is that suffering, I was like trying to understand it, and I think I kind of get it. It's like suffering is relative. So you have the person who is going ups and downs. They have their ups and downs throughout life, and the average balance is like how yeah, so the average balance is like your balance stabilization slash baseline for deviation. So deviation above it is like happiness, deviation below it is like suffering. And so you just have the deviation between it. And the wider the deviation, of course, the more suffering that you'll have. And also, it's related to appreciation. So appreciation can help you minimize the suffering, because even though you might be like really down here, with the appreciation you can move back up to like here or even here, wherever, maybe even all the way like even positive, or it's all about perception. So because suffering, a lot of it is perception. Of course there's like physical pain and all that, but even that is perception. A great example is like if you do this, you'll like feel, if you do it like really hard, you'll feel the pain. And then if you do this, like you do it hard enough, then the other one stops, you stop feeling it. So it's all about perception again. It's just like um yeah. So that is a big aspect to the suffering, is like the appreciation. And you just want to minimize the deviation from the balance slash from the stabilization, like average. So zero is like zero, and that's the average. That's your average baseline. If you just add up all your positives and negatives. So it's like a balance sheet. And that the average of that balance sheet is the zero mark. And then everything above it is like above that, in terms of a score, would be like uh, happiness, and then below again is that suffering. Now again, it's all about perception too. Um, and it's also about habituation. So habituation is that that average line. So that's kind of what I realized. I was like trying to understand it, and I think what I realized is like the suffering is about what you're habituated to. It's like the person who's super used to pain, where for them they have a higher pain threshold, and someone who's like barely used to pain will have a much lower pain threshold. And the same goes the other way. Like someone who's really used to happiness will be like wanting a lot more happiness and won't feel as happy from that happiness, right? And the person who's used to much less happiness, once they get like some big, positives, they'll be like super duper happy. Anyway, so the point is that uh, going back to the balance and the change, So you have the change now. So the change is what's creating this deviation, because otherwise you'd just be stuck at one point. If you were just stuck at one point, you wouldn't have the problem of suffering. But once as you have this change, you start getting deviation, and this is when you get that suffering. Now the problem is that when people have suffering, they react to it in different ways. So some people react to it in a way where they confront the suffering and they try to problem solve it, and they try to like understand it and feel it and accept it, and then get to a better place. And then other people will put it off, they'll like ignore it, they'll try to distract themselves from it, and it continues, and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, and it's like always playing in the background. So because it's always playing in the background, the suffering, it'll still have its influence. Either the person can distract themselves a lot, it's probably still going to be having its influence over them and over their actions, just from the background. There's like they might not see it, other people might see it, but they're just kind of distracting themselves, and either they know it or they don't, but maybe they forgot, however it goes. But so yeah. And there's another thing that was interesting, which is that I realized the dimensions, like time and space, that's all about relativity, because the only way you have that relativity, right, the habituation level and relative to that habituation level, is through space and time. Space is a comparison, because now you have space to have multiple things in that space, and once you have multiple things in that space, you can have relativity. And same goes for time. If you have multiple timeline, time positions. So if you move throughout time, then you learn, right? You see, if you have memory, you can remember that timeline, and you have an idea of change now and relativity again. Relative one time to a different time. And so the thing is that usually that would mean that it's like envy. Envy is you seeing something and then that you don't have, and then that creates a new standard, right? So it creates a new standard. It's like, oh, I can have that, and then you see another thing. It's like it creates even a new another standard, and then your just standard goes up and up and up and up, and then you wonder why you have so much suffering, because you want so many different things, and of course you can't get them, and then you have the suffering. So there's that aspect to it, of the relativity, like the envy. So that relates to dimensions of the framework, and then we already talked about the change in the balance, and then of course there's like capability to it. So I guess there's like capability was all about the mental and the physical. So suffering is also mental and physical. I would say that suffering, if physically, is again like higher energy. This physical version is always usually higher energy because there's more mass in it, and there's like a high flow rate of calories slash energy. And because it's like, I think the brain, right, the brain uses up 20% of your body's energy, so the whole other 80% is being used by the body. So as for what that means, it just means that a lot of the suffering is like physical, maybe. So it's like like back pain or tiredness, or maybe heart problems, or maybe what else? It could be, I mean, just like it could be muscle aching, so muscles, you got your bones. It could be like problems with your blood flow, or your your joints, which, yeah. So there's like a whole, all the different parts of the bodies, and anyway, so there's that, and so there's that aspect. But the physical also connects to the mental, and so even though it's a lot of that pain resides in the physical, it also has to so it doesn't it basically, it ends up affecting the mental. So the mental is the perception, right? So the pain, because the all the pain and suffering is perceived in the um in the brain, right? That's the control center. And that, like, of course you have your nerves, right? You have your nerves all over your body, which are taking in the data, but it's the brain that processes all of it. So I mean, I guess you could say because of that, maybe the brain is like equal in terms of suffering, or even, I mean, yeah, because you also have your senses, and it's also instinct. It's like your evolution. The only reason why you're in pain when you're hungry, or you're in pain when you're thirsty, right? Those are also physical pains, or when you're cold, or when you're like suffocating. Those are pains, but they're from evolutionary standpoint and from your genetics. So again, it's more of like a physical pain. So yeah, and again, like I was saying, with the mental pain, it's all about perception. So again, it's the same thing when you want something. When you want something, it's like if you don't get it, then there's a suffering, there's like a pain there. And of course, if you have a different attitude and you're like, oh, well, that's okay. Maybe it was better off that I didn't have it, or you know what, it's good anyway because I shouldn't learn to like have everything I want. It's a humbling experience. Those types of things, those types of thoughts. Then you change that attitude, and so you'll have less the suffering. And so yeah. Now, as for why suffering is like an important topic, like I was explaining before, it's relates to the generational problem. So this bad energy, you have a lot of bad energy um, in like society, like war and killing, stealing, exploiting, etc. Slavery, manipulation, etc. Yeah, all of it is because of, well, so it's, I wouldn't say all of it, but a lot of it is due to the suffering. Like for instance, someone would want something because they're suffering, right? So like when you're suffering, when you're down here, you want to go back up. So you want to go back up, and you should take more, and you take more, and you take more, and then you're up here, and then you just naturally go back down. It's not like you want to go back down, but you'll naturally go back down. Or your standard goes up. So your standard goes up, and that's all it is. But like, so maybe you're here, and before that was positive, but then your standard goes up, and so it's negative now. And your standard will also go, so there's the average, but remember, it's all about perception. So because it's all about perception, it's not literally just what you're physically habituated to, but it's also what you're mentally habituated to. And so that standard changes. So that standard changes mentally, right? Physically, it's a little more consistent, arguably, because it's high energy, right? So higher inertia. So higher inertia for the physical habituation slash standard. But the mental one is lower energy, lower inertia, so it can move around a lot more. Now, going back to the suffering, on like why it's important again, what happens is this bad energy, right, is causing you, again, to want to go back up. And so you keep wanting to go back. You go back in, it just naturally happens. You naturally go back down. You're suffering, you want to go back up. And sometimes you're even here and you're not suffering, but the fear of suffering is like causing you to just take more and do more bad stuff and cause a lot more bad consequences. So what this shows is like the suffering is, it's like a desire, right? So it causes desires. It's a feeling, and that feeling causes you to have different reactions. So yeah, so it's basically a feeling that causes different reactions, and those reactions are the problem. So just like I was saying, like how some, people react to suffering differently. Some people react to it in a more productive manner, and other people react to it in a hurtful manner, right? And so the difference is just that it's the same with the consequences, and why the suffering is so problematic. Because then what ends up happening is you have all these problematic consequences because people don't react to the suffering properly. So then they start doing bad things because they're feeling bad from the suffering, so they want what they want. And if they just learn to reduce their standard, or they just reduce their standard and be like humble and appreciative, then they wouldn't have to do all those bad things. Now, of course, there's the physical pain. It's like you're getting tortured. Physical pain, like I was saying, is high inertia. It's much harder to move it around, but you can also balance it out, right? So if you can balance out the mental and the physical standards, then you might have the mentally you're in the positive zone because your appreciation, but maybe physically you're in the negative zone. And if you can balance the two out like equally, then it's not so much of a problem. And so again, that goes back to the balance. Then you also have the framework, the part of the framework, which is the justice. So justice is all about the rules, and like I was talking about, the consequences, right? So justice is rules, basically requirements and consequences. And so you have a lot of those consequences showing up in the problem of suffering. And as for requirements, I would say requirements is the suffering. So the suffering is like you have the suffering, then you have the reaction to the suffering, and then you have the consequences. So the suffering is a form of change, right? It's like the change of suffering, the changing suffering, right? So the changing level. So it's the feeling, the changing feeling, and so sometimes that feeling is suffering, sometimes it's happiness, and so that changing feeling leads to either a suffering feeling or a happiness feeling, and that leads to requirements. So the requirements is like what causes that feeling, and the consequences is what happens because of that feeling, right? So what, in terms of what causes the feeling of suffering, well, of course, there's the physical causes. So like the injuries, the lack of your needs, you're like super thirsty, super hungry, super duper cold, you're suffocating, whatever it is, you're bleeding out, you have your nerves are like screaming out, your nerves, it could be all sorts of things, but that's the physical causes of the suffering. It could also be like headaches, and like that's still a physical type of pain, right? So it could be headaches or stuff like that. And then you have the mental, which is the perception, the standard, yeah. And so that is also caused by usually the senses. So the senses are most connected to the brain. So you have your visual sense is the strongest, along with your auditory sense. So those two senses are the strongest. And of course, then like the third strongest would be your touch sensory. The sense of touch. Actually, I don't know, arguably that one's like it's like pretty strong too. It's like those are the top three, yeah. So, and so yeah, so those three senses are like have a, like I said, the physical pain is a lot of it is touch. Of course, mental pain is a lot more the visual, and also some auditory, and also the imagination of touch and like the feelings, that sense. But so yeah, but it's of course physically your pain is also tied to your senses. So but yeah, so that's the justice, the requirements, and the consequences. We talked about the balance. We talked about the change, right? The changing of the feeling, changing of the time. So you get the relativity. So you get the comparison. So you have a feeling between happiness, suffering, and hence you get a directionality because of that change too. You also have, so yeah, you have the justice, the balance, the change. You have the capability, the mental, the physical. Also, you have the dimensions, which is the relativity. And then, of course, the suffering happens over time and over space. And yeah, dependent on your environment and your history, right? Your what you perceive, what you're built up standard, right? Your built up standard and experiences and habituation, both mentally and physically. And then going back to capability, so the capability, I talked about the mental and the physical, but as for capability in the sense of just like, what can you do with the suffering? The suffering is a directionality type of thing. So it causes you to have certain reactions, right? It's a feeling, and that feeling so that's the capability of the feeling is, so the feeling is, it just makes you feel something, feel a certain way. And what the main capability behind the feeling is the, the reaction. And also it would be the, expectation. So the requirement, consequences. It would also be the anticipation. So it'd be the anticipation and the, reaction. So when someone's anticipating this suffering, they already are starting to react a certain way. And when they actually feel the suffering, then they react a certain way again. So again, that's where most of the capability is at in terms of like the causes that you get from it. So that is why, you should try to, well, yeah, so the point is that's why suffering is so important in terms of like trying to understand it and as a problem that should be like solved. And it's not like, oh, everyone goes to euphoria, utopia, and you're gonna magically, feel less suffering. Like I was explaining, it's all about balance. So the more deviation you have, the more suffering you're gonna have. If you can get like more balance, then you can get less suffering. So you basically just have more balance and you'll have less suffering. If you go like this all the time, then you're going to have a lot more suffering. And you have to remember this is an average. So clearly, if you have like a lot of stuff and you have, it's like high energy, then naturally the natural energy is just the lowest. You can go like the bare minimum, just survival. And because compared to that bare minimum, which is like the bottom kind of, unless you're dead, right? So unless you're dead, okay, so there's that bare minimum survival. Of course, there's technically like you're still surviving, but eventually you're just dead. So I guess dead is the bare minimum. You have survival, which is like the most likely bare minimum. Like most of the time, your common bare minimum is going to be survival. Of course, you could go below that. You could be injured, in serious pain, etc. And then you have you're doing well and you're happy, and okay. And so what happens is you want the balance, because if you don't have the balance, and balance, by the way, in this sense is just the net balance. So if the net balance is has way more, I guess I would call it deviation. So the more deviation you have, the more of a problem it is. You want it to be like the whole idea of balance is all about recycling. And well, it's not all about, but like a big part of it is recycling. And so you want to, get that circularity to minimize what? To minimize deviation. So when you minimize deviation through recycling, it's really, beneficial, right? For a lot of things. But in this case, it minimizes that deviation, which is super important for minimizing suffering. So if you can minimize that deviation through recycling, then it's good. And recycling is what? It's a mix of giving and taking, giving and taking. And if you do it equally, then it's not a problem. And what is change? Change is movement, and movement can only be attraction or repulsion. Attraction or repulsion. So because of that, the the uh, the suffering, the deviation, if you want to recycle it, you want to minimize the deviation, then you just have, through recycling, you just have to, do the giving and the taking, attraction, repulsion. So when you get something, you need to, you accept it, but then you also kind of get over it. If you so it's like you get over it, you accept something, so it's like you're kind of giving away. And, um yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but like, I guess like, let me see a good example. It's like, past, right? So let's look at time, because like time is something we can maybe visualize better. Like, you have your past life and your future life, and you're living in the present. So the present is the one you're receiving at the moment, right? And so you're receiving the present, and you want to get over the past. You receive the present, you want to get over the past. You receive the present, you want to get over the past. And so you accept the past, you just get over it. It's like, okay. And then you take in and you accept the new time, the present. And you take in the next present and you get over and you accept the past. And so it's just this balance. And if you can maintain that balance, then you're less likely to have that high deviation in suffering. And it's kind of, and of course, it's related to a lot of other things, but it's an example. It's basically, again, recycling is all about minimizing deviation. If you're not, you're just going to go, and of course, naturally, the universe likes balance. So because the universe naturally likes balance, the energy is going to balance back out. So because the universe likes balance, equilibrium, it's naturally the energy is going to go back down. So if you let the energy go completely out of control, then you're going to be expecting a big deviation. Now this is related to so this would be related, like a great example is ego. So your ego, if you don't like get it back in balance, right? If you don't get it back in check, then it builds up, and then it can fall and go down quite a bit. And that would be related to the suffering and the deviation. So there's a lot of different examples that you could use. It definitely is helpful to try to go through a couple, but I think I made a couple of good examples for you guys, and I think you get the point. So anyway, hope you liked the video. If you want to see more videos like this, I make them all the time. You can go check them out. And anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, see you.